Brenda's voice, flat as the linoleum, declared, "I'm taking a trip with Todd next week." Paul froze, fork halfway to his mouth. The kitchen, usually a place of quiet comfort, suddenly felt like a public arena. His wife, his own wife, looked at him with an almost bored expression. "You're still young," she added, a dismissive shrug. "You need a reliable man." Paul pushed open the back door, the screen giving its familiar groan. Tuesday. Another Tuesday in October, the air already carrying a bite that promised a long winter. He pulled his tie loose, letting it hang around his neck. The scent of something vaguely Italian simmered on the stove, a comfort he'd come to expect. He tossed his briefcase onto the hall floor, a dull thud against the wood. Brenda stood by the kitchen island, nursing a glass of white wine. Her back was to him, and something about the stillness of her shoulders, the way she held herself, felt off, too quiet. She didn't turn immediately, didn't offer the usual small smile or a soft inquiry about his day. Her blonde hair, recently cut shorter than he preferred, gleamed under the recessed lights. "Hey, honey, how was your day?" he asked, his voice a little too bright, a little too eager to push past the quiet. He tried to keep his tone even, normal, like any other evening. She turned then, slowly. Her face was calm, too calm. Her eyes met his, clear and unblinking, without the usual warmth he sought after a long day at the bank. It was the kind of calm that preceded a storm, or perhaps the kind that indicated the storm had already passed, leaving devastation behind. "It was fine," she said, her voice flat, devoid of inflection. She took a small sip of wine. "Listen, we need to talk." Paul's stomach dropped, a cold, heavy stone. He knew that phrase. Everyone knew that phrase. It always meant something had broken, something essential. He walked to the kitchen table, the familiar laminate surface suddenly alien beneath his fingertips, and pulled out a chair. The scraping sound echoed in the suddenly vast room. He sat, his gaze fixed on her. She took another breath. A slow, deliberate intake that felt like a lifetime. "I've been having an affair with my boss, Todd," she stated, her words dropping into the air like ice cubes into an empty glass. There was no hesitation, no emotion. Flat as a prairie road in summer. "We're planning a romantic trip together next week." Paul stared at her. He waited for the slight tremor in her lips, the quick intake of breath that would signal a punchline, a dark joke designed to test his reaction. He waited for her to smile, to say just kidding. It never came. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The simmering smell of dinner seemed to mock him. "You... what?" he managed, his voice a whisper, a dry rasp. He felt the blood drain from his face. She shrugged, a small dismissive movement of her shoulders. She looked at her glass of wine. "I've been sleeping with Todd. We're in love." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Paul felt a pressure building behind his eyes, a dull ache starting in his temples. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "How long?" he whispered. The question barely audible. Brenda glanced down at her nails, inspecting them, as if counting the days on her fingertips. "About 6 months now," she replied, her tone still remarkably even, as if discussing the weather. A wave of heat washed over Paul, a sudden rush of blood that pushed the cold stone in his stomach upwards, replacing it with a searing fire. 6 months, half a year, while he worked, while he slept beside her, while he tried to plan their future. "Brenda, what the hell?" he shouted, his voice cracking. "How could you do this?" She rolled her eyes, a gesture so dismissive, so casual, it stung more than any angry retort. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Paul. These things happen." She looked at him again, a faint trace of impatience on her face. "Todd's better in bed. He's better at his job. He has better future prospects. He's a real man." The words hit him like a physical blow, each one a sharp, stinging cut. Paul pushed himself up from the table, the chair scraping loudly against the floor, his hands clenched into fists, his whole body trembling with a rage so potent it made his head swim. "Then, get out," he roared, pointing a trembling finger at the door. This marriage is over. Brenda let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound devoid of humor, laced instead with pure contempt. She raised an eyebrow, a mocking smirk playing on her lips. Oh, Paul, you're so naive. You really think you can manage without me? Who'll run the house? Who'll keep your life in order? Watch me, Paul growled, his voice low and tight, vibrating with a raw promise. His breath hitched in his chest, the pain and anger swirling into a bitter, steel-cold resolve. She merely shrugged again, picking up her purse from the counter. Her eyes, still calm, gave him a final, dismissive glance. She walked past him, a faint scent of her perfume lingering in her wake, and then she was gone. The back door clicked shut, a sound both final and impossibly hollow. Paul stood there, in the sudden silence of his kitchen, the smell of dinner now smelling like ashes. His legs felt weak, his knees threatening to buckle. He leaned against the counter, the cool laminate pressing against his burning forehead. His world, once solid and predictable, had just shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. But beneath the shock, beneath the raw pain, a cold, hard knot began to form in his gut. No, he wasn't going to let her get away with this. Not like this. The sound of Brenda's car tires crunching on the gravel driveway faded into the night. Paul stood in the quiet kitchen. The lingering scent of her perfume. A cruel reminder. The immediate shock, the punch to the gut, began to recede, replaced by something sharper, colder. It wasn't pity for himself, not anymore. It was a hardening, a steeling of the spine. He looked at the half-cooked pasta on the stove, a monument to a life that had just ceased to exist. He turned off the burner without a second thought. His feet, seemingly of their own accord, carried him down the short hallway to what Brenda called her home office. It was a spare room, usually neat, dominated by a large wooden desk and a filing cabinet. Her work laptop, a sleek silver model, sat open on the desk. He remembered her complaining about having to take it home over the weekend, how she hated the extra security steps. Too much trouble for a Friday night, she'd said. He remembered that now, and a grim satisfaction settled in his chest. Sure enough, the screen was lit, displaying the login prompt. No password. Just a click to enter. For the next few hours, Paul sat in Brenda's chair, the soft leather creaking under his weight. The office fan hummed quietly in the corner, a steady drone against the racing thoughts in his head. He moved the cursor with a deliberate hand, opening folders, sifting through files. He started with her email, scrolling through subject lines, his jaw tight. Mundane work communications, then personal newsletters, then, suddenly, a string of messages from Todd. The first few were innocent enough meeting requests, project updates. Then, the tone shifted. Thinking of you, B. Can't wait for our lunch. Counting down the hours till Friday, Paul's stomach churned, a bitter bile rising in his throat. He clicked. The words leaped off the screen, raw and explicit. Details of stolen moments. Clandestine meetings, whispers of a future. Every line was a fresh cut. He found messages discussing their romantic trip next week, the very trip she'd just announced to him. The hotel name, the flight times, the small, intimate details that should have been his. It made his head pound, a dull, insistent throb behind his eyes. Then he found them. Buried in a subfolder innocently labeled, Marketing Jadio, Marketing Materials, were the intimate photos. Not many, but enough. Enough to confirm everything. Brenda's face, laughing into the camera, Todd's arm around her. Other images, more explicit, made Paul's vision blur for a moment. He leaned back in the chair, a guttural sound escaping his throat. Something between a gasp and a growl. His hands trembled, but he didn't stop. He found a small USB drive in his old desk drawer, plugged it into Brenda's laptop, and began to copy every email, every message, every incriminating photograph. Methodically, the progress bar crept across the screen, a slow, agonizing crawl, but he waited, silent and unmoving, until every last byte was secure. Once the copying was complete, he closed the laptop, A quiet click that felt like a door slamming shut on a part of his life. He pushed away from the desk. The next step was financial. He walked over to his own desk, in the corner of the living room, and sat down at his desktop computer. He pulled up their joint bank accounts. He remembered the conversations, years ago, about trust and partnership. The shared dreams those accounts represented. Now, he scoffed. A dry, humorless sound. Trust. Partnership. The words tasted like ash. He navigated to the transfer section. One account after another. Checking. Savings, their shared investment fund. The small amount they had put aside for a new car. Every last cent. He moved it all. A few clicks, a few confirmations. The screen refreshed, showing zero balances in the joint accounts, the entire sum consolidated into his personal savings. It was a clean sweep. The digital records of their shared financial life, erased. The finality of the action was stark. It was late now. The world outside, hushed. The only sounds were the quiet hum of his computer and the occasional creak of the old house. By the time the first streaks of gray light appeared through the kitchen window, painting the edges of the blinds in pale silver, Paul had a plan. It wasn't fully formed in every detail, but the overarching structure was clear. Brenda and Todd, they were going to face the music, and he was going to be the one to play the tune. A cold, hard resolve had settled deep within him, replacing the burning anger with a chilling clarity. The betrayal had been absolute, and his response would be equally so. The gray dawn crept further into the room, painting the familiar objects with a stark, cold light. Paul felt an unnerving calm, a quiet resolve that had settled over him with the coming of morning. He had started a fire, and now he would fan the flames. His first target, his first seed of reckoning, was Todd's wife, Karen. He'd met Karen a few times over the years, at those mandatory company shindigs and the occasional picnic in the park. She was a quiet woman, always had a kind word, a gentle smile. She'd always seemed like a good sort, the type who baked cookies for school fundraisers and kept a tidy garden. Paul remembered a Christmas party, Karen standing beside Todd, a hand resting lightly on his arm, a picture of quiet domesticity. The memory twisted in his gut. She deserved to know. More than anyone, she deserved to know. He found her email address through a quick search of the company directory, an older address he remembered Todd had used once. He composed a brief, formal email. No accusations, no dramatics, just facts. He attached some of the tamer evidence, a few of the less explicit messages, enough to raise a red flag, enough to plant the seed of doubt and confirm it with indisputable proof. He didn't want to traumatize her, not entirely, but he wanted her to understand the depth of the betrayal. He hit send. The sound of the key clicking felt like a small, precise shot fired in the quiet morning. Next, his attention turned to Metro Corp, their mutual workplace. He knew the company's policies. He'd sat through enough HR training sessions, enough presentations on professional conduct and ethics. Sleeping with a married subordinate, especially when one held a position of authority like Todd did, wasn't just frowned upon. It was usually grounds for termination, or at least a severe reprimand. This wasn't just about personal betrayal. It was about professional misconduct. He opened a new email, addressing it to the Human Resources Department, specifically to Martha Jenkins, the head of HR. Martha was a no-nonsense woman. By the book. A stickler for rules. Perfect. Paul maintained a professional tone, detailing the facts without emotion, simply laying out the timeline, the evidence. He attached the most damning of the emails, the ones that clearly showed the power dynamic, the planning of the romantic trip during company time, the discussions of office resources being used for their tryst. It was a whole lot of damning evidence, meticulously collected. He proofread it twice, ensuring every word was precise, every attachment labeled clearly. Then, with a click, he sent that one too. The digital missile was launched, but Paul wasn't done yet. He thought of Brenda, of her obsession with appearances, her carefully curated image. Brenda, who spent hours on her social media profiles, who always had the perfect outfit, the perfect anecdote for every gathering. Brenda, who prided herself on being well-liked, respected in her social circles. That was her real vulnerability. That was where he could truly make her feel the weight of her actions. He spent the next hour, a methodical, almost meditative hour, crafting emails. He pulled up his contacts, then Brenda's, sifting through names. Her parents, who lived in Iowa, proud and conservative. Her sister, Kelly, who always looked up to Brenda. Her college buddies, with whom she still had an annual reunion. Even her book club, a group of women who met weekly to discuss literature and, more often than not, local gossip. Each email was carefully worded, not overtly accusatory, but subtly devastating. He didn't use harsh language, didn't resort to insults. Instead, he presented the facts, shared a few of the tamer, yet still revealing, messages, and let them draw their own conclusions. He painted a nice little rundown of exactly what kind of person Brenda really was. A stark contrast to the perfect facade she presented to the world. He wrote about the 6 months of deceit, the planned trip, the casual dismissal of their marriage. He didn't ask for sympathy. He didn't demand condemnation. He simply laid bare the truth. He hit send, one after another, a quiet cascade of digital shrapnel spreading out into her meticulously constructed world. Once all the digital missives were sent, Paul leaned back in his chair. The first rays of sun were now truly illuminating the room, but the air still held a chill. He felt a strange combination of exhaustion and grim satisfaction. He had planted the seeds. Now, he would wait for the storm. He knew it would be a hell of a storm. But he was ready. The storm began to brew before noon. The phone, which had been silent for hours, suddenly buzzed on the kitchen counter. Paul glanced at the screen. It was an unfamiliar number, but the area code was his in-laws. Brenda's mom. He let it ring, watching the name flash once, twice, before it went to voicemail. He knew what was coming. A moment later, the voicemail notification popped up. He pressed play, holding the phone away from his ear. The voice that erupted was shrill, laced with a familiar indignation. "Paul, what in God's name is going on?" she wailed. "Brenda just called me, crying, saying you sent her sister some things. How could she? Oh, how could she do this to you, Paul? We raised her better than this. I just don't understand. How could she hurt you like this?" The message went on, a colorful cascade of shock and hurt and betrayal, Brenda's mother projecting her own disappointment onto the narrative. Paul listened, a grim smile playing on his lips. "Guess the apple fell pretty far from the tree on this one," he muttered to himself, clicking delete. Then came a text. This one was from Kelly, Brenda's sister. He and Kelly had always gotten along, a quiet understanding between them during family gatherings. She was the steady one, the one who didn't get caught up in Brenda's occasional dramatics. Her message was long, a stream of consciousness that conveyed genuine shock and concern. "Paul, I just saw your email. I can't even begin to tell you how sorry I am. I can't believe Brenda would do something like this. My own sister. I'm so disgusted. You don't deserve any of it, not a single bit. You've always been so good to her. To all of us. Please, let me know if you need anything at all. A place to stay, someone to talk to, anything. My place is open. Seriously, just call." He read it twice, a small, involuntary sigh escaping his lips. At least someone saw it for what it was. At least someone in her family had some moral compass. Kelly's support was a small, unexpected comfort in the wreckage. He didn't text back immediately. He would, later. For now, he just let the words sit there, a small beacon in the gloom. The rest of the morning passed in a strange limbo. He made himself coffee, the aroma doing little to clear the fog in his head. He walked around the house, noting the things that were Brenda's, the things that were theirs. The living room, usually full of her magazines and throw pillows, felt cold and empty. He hadn't showered yet, still in the same clothes he'd worn the day before. The feeling of being suspended, waiting for the other shoe to drop, was almost unbearable. He sensed these were just the echoes, the first ripples from the stones he'd thrown. The real fireworks, the full brunt of the storm, were yet to come. He imagined Brenda receiving her emails, her phone buzzing with calls from furious parents and shocked friends. He imagined her trying to explain, to justify, to deny. A faint, bitter satisfaction curled in his gut. Later that afternoon, the sun was high, but the chill inside the house hadn't lifted. Paul was considering ordering a pizza, the thought of cooking anything for himself feeling like too much effort. His life, only yesterday so predictable, still felt completely upside down, teetering on an unstable edge. He knew he needed to eat, needed to maintain some semblance of routine. But the appetite wasn't there. His phone buzzed again, vibrating against the wooden counter. He picked it up, squinting at the screen. It was Steve. Steve Harding, a co-worker from his department at the bank. Steve was a chatty guy, always knew what was going on, and had a cousin who worked a few floors down from Brenda at MetroCorp. Paul answered, his voice a little hoarse. "Hey, Steve." Paul. Steve's voice was urgent, hushed, almost conspiratorial. It was clear he was talking from a place of discretion. "You are not going to believe what just went down at MetroCorp. You there, Paul?" Steve asked, his voice still low, filled with a mixture of shock and glee. "I'm here," Paul said, his grip tightening on the phone. "What happened?" Steve recounted the scene, breathless, like he'd been there himself, front row for the whole spectacle. "Karen, Todd's wife. She showed up at MetroCorp about an hour ago. Came in like a bat out of hell, apparently. My cousin, Mark, he was down in the lobby, saw the whole thing. Said she was absolutely furious." Paul pictured it. Karen, usually so quiet, so unassuming. The image of her, enraged, was vivid and unsettling. She marched straight past security. "Paul," Steve continued, his voice gaining speed. "Right up to Todd's fancy corner office. Didn't even slow down, just went right for the throat." Paul closed his eyes, picturing the glass walls of Todd's office, the open floor plan of MetroCorp. Everyone would have seen. Everyone would have heard. And she proceeded to tear him a new one. Steve elaborated, a slight chuckle escaping him, quickly suppressed. In front of everyone, yelling, crying, the whole 9 yards. Mark said he could hear her from 3 floors down. Something about, "How could you do this to us, to our kids?" And Todd, he was apparently just trying to shush her, pulling her into his office. But she wasn't having it. Mark said she even threw some files. Important-looking ones, too, right out onto the carpet. The image of official documents scattered across the pristine office floor, a symbol of public humiliation, brought a grim satisfaction to Paul. This was the collateral damage, the ripple effect of casual betrayal. Security eventually got up there, had to escort her out, Steve said, the excitement in his voice palpable. But the damage was already done, you know. The whole office heard everything, clear as a bell. Apparently, Brenda was trying to hide in her cube. But everyone saw her. Her name got screamed a few times too. Can you believe it? Paul could believe it. He could picture Brenda, mortified, trying to disappear as her carefully constructed world imploded around her. He could almost hear the whispers, the sudden silence when she walked past, the sidelong glances. He felt a flicker of something, a momentary thought that maybe he'd gone too far. Maybe this was too much. But then he remembered Brenda's dismissive shrug, her cold words, the intimate photos, and the feeling vanished, replaced by the same cold resolve. And get this, Steve lowered his voice even further, as if sharing a top-secret intel. Rumor has it Todd was immediately called into an emergency meeting. With the board of directors, Martha Jenkins from HR, she was seen heading in there too, looking real serious. My guess is, he's not going to be making that romantic trip next week, maybe not any trips for a while. And Brenda, well, she's probably next. Hard to keep an affair under wraps when it blows up like that. Paul hung up the phone. The quiet in the house felt different now. No longer empty, but filled with the echoes of Karen's fury. Steve's breathless report. He almost felt bad for the guy, Todd, for the public spectacle, for the certain career hit. Almost. But then he remembered Todd's smug face at the company picnic, remembered Brenda's casual betrayal, and the fleeting sympathy evaporated. This was just the beginning. For Todd, maybe a forced resignation. For Brenda, it would be worse. Her image, her carefully constructed social standing, was already in tatters. And that was just the start. He wondered if she was still planning on that romantic trip now. Life's costly choices often reveal their true price in the most unexpected and public ways. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. Brenda's day, Paul mused, clearly wasn't going much better than Todd's. He imagined the steady stream of calls, the stinging text messages from once loyal friends, the shocked accusations from family members. The picture in his mind brought a tight, satisfied nod. He hadn't heard anything directly, but he didn't need to. He knew the kind of damage a carefully crafted email, delivered to the right people, could do to a person's reputation, especially to someone as image-conscious as Brenda. He pictured her phone, undoubtedly blowing up nonstop since morning. He imagined the conversations, Brenda trying to twist the narrative, to deflect, to minimize. It wouldn't work. The evidence was too clear, too concise. The facts, unadorned, spoke for themselves. Friends would be pulling away, their expressions a mix of judgment and embarrassment. Family members would be expressing their shock and disappointment, their voices heavy with the weight of expectation and betrayal. He even imagined her parents, Brenda's mom and dad, calling her. Not with a gentle, "What happened?" but with the kind of heartbroken fury only parents could deliver. He pictured them, in tears, demanding to know how they'd raised such a heartless, selfish daughter. Their voices echoing with the values they thought they had instilled. Brenda, he knew, would hate that most of all. Her parents' disapproval was a heavy burden, one she usually went to great lengths to avoid. The sun had set, and the kitchen light, which he hadn't bothered to turn on, cast long shadows. Paul was on the couch, half watching a baseball game he wasn't invested in, when the crunch of tires on the driveway broke the evening quiet. 7 o'clock. Right on schedule. Moments later, the front door burst open. Not just opened, but slammed against the wall with a violence that made the house shudder. It was Brenda. She looked like she'd been through a tornado, or perhaps had been hit by one. Her blonde hair, usually meticulously styled, was a tangled mess, strands clinging to her tear-streaked face. Her mascara was smeared in dark rivers down her cheeks, and her eyes were red and puffy, swollen from hours of crying. Her expensive blouse was rumpled, her posture defeated. "What did you do?" she screamed, her voice hoarse, raw with a mix of fury and despair. She stood in the entryway, hands clenched at her sides, chest heaving. Paul looked up from the television, his expression calm, almost bored. He took a slow sip of his lukewarm coffee. "Me?" he replied, his voice even, devoid of any emotion. "I didn't do anything. You're the one who decided to cheat." His words seemed to suck the last bit of air from her lungs. The fight drained from her, her shoulders slumping. She stared at him, a broken, bewildered look on her face, before slowly collapsing to the floor. Not a graceful descent, but a crumpled heap, her head in her hands, racked with uncontrolled sobs. "They fired him, Paul," she wailed, her voice muffled, thick with tears. "They fired Todd, and now everyone knows. My parents hate me. Kelly won't answer her phone. Everyone hates me." Paul let out a mirthless laugh, a dry, humorless sound that cut through the silence. He shifted on the couch, facing her fully. "And how could I do this to you, Brenda? How could I possibly do this to you? You're the one who threw away our marriage. You're the one who decided to lie and cheat and make a fool out of me." His voice remained steady, flat, a stark contrast to her hysterics. "All I did," he added, his gaze cold and unwavering, "was make sure you faced the consequences of your actions." The words hung in the air, undeniable and heavy. He watched her, this woman he had loved, reduced to a weeping mess on his living room floor. He felt nothing. No pity. No satisfaction. Just a quiet sense of closure. The scale had been unbalanced, and now, it was slowly, but surely, coming back into equilibrium. Brenda slowly lifted her head, her face a mask of ruined makeup and raw emotion. Her eyes, still swollen, met Paul's. "I'm sorry, Paul," she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "I made a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake." She tried to push herself up, her movements slow and unsteady, as if her body itself was heavy with regret. "Please," she pleaded, reaching out a trembling hand towards him, her fingers brushing the air. "Can't we just forget this ever happened? We can work it out. Go to counseling. We can fix this, Paul. Please." For a split second, Paul almost felt a pang of pity. The sight of her, so utterly broken, so desperate, was a stark contrast to the confident, dismissive woman who had walked out the day before. The human part of him, the part that had loved her for years, stirred. He saw the vulnerability, the genuine fear in her eyes, and a flicker of something soft touched his cold resolve. But then, the memory of her words, sharp and clear, cut through the momentary weakness. Todd's better in bed, better at his job, better future prospects. Her casual shrug, her mocking laugh, the way she had checked her nails as she confessed 6 months of deceit. The thought of her boasting about Todd, tearing down his own worth, extinguished the flicker of pity as quickly as it had appeared. The ice in his veins solidified once more. "No, Brenda," Paul said, his voice flat, resolute. "We can't just forget this happened. It's too late for sorry." He watched her face crumble further, the last vestiges of hope draining from her expression. He stood from the couch, his movements deliberate, unhurried. He walked to the side table in the living room, where he had placed a manila envelope earlier that day. He picked it up, the weight of the papers inside feeling substantial, definitive. He turned back to her, holding the envelope out. "I've already filed for divorce, Brenda," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "The papers are with my lawyer. You'll be hearing from him soon." Brenda stared at him, her mouth slightly agape, the word divorce hanging in the air like a death knell. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, searched his, as if expecting to find some hidden tenderness, some sign that he was bluffing, but there was nothing there. Only a cold, unyielding resolve. "Divorce," she whispered, the word barely audible. "But what am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go?" The questions were filled with genuine fear, a sudden, terrifying realization of her precarious situation. Paul simply looked at her, then repeated her own cold words from the day before, letting them hang in the air, a cruel echo of her past callousness. "Not my problem anymore." He watched her flinch, the impact of her own cruelty thrown back in her face. "Maybe your parents will take you in," he suggested, his tone dry, almost sarcastic. "They seemed pretty upset about the situation. Or, hey," he added, a hint of something bitter creeping into his voice, "I hear Todd's got a spare room now that his wife's kicked him out. I'm sure he'd be happy to take you in." He didn't wait for her response. He simply turned and walked out of the room, leaving her crumpled on the floor, her sobs filling the sudden silence he left behind. He walked down the hall, out the back door, and into the crisp autumn air. The stars were starting to emerge, sharp points of light in the deepening blue. Paul took a deep breath. He felt something like relief, a profound sense of weight finally lifted off his shoulders. The cold, heavy burden of betrayal, of anger, of unresolved hurt, it was not gone, not entirely, but the immediate pressure had eased. The reckoning was complete, at least for now. He looked up at the vast, indifferent sky. The next few weeks blurred into a chaotic, unsettling rhythm of lawyer meetings and stacks of paperwork. Each document, each signature, felt like another nail in the coffin of his old life. The house, once shared, now felt vast and empty. Brenda moved out, taking only a few boxes, retreating to her sister Kelly's place on the other side of town. The silence she left behind was heavy, but it was a silence Paul found himself slowly getting used to. He heard through the grapevine, a hushed whisper from a co-worker who knew someone at MetroCorp, that Brenda had lost her job too. Apparently, HR hadn't looked kindly on the situation, especially with the public spectacle Karen had caused. Companies, Paul realized, weren't keen on employees who slept with married bosses, particularly when it caused such a stir. It was another consequence, Another domino falling in the intricate chain reaction he had set in motion. Paul threw himself into work, burying himself in spreadsheets and client meetings. The bank, usually a place of steady routine, became a sanctuary. A place where he could focus on something other than the wreckage of his personal life. He started hitting the gym more often, the physical exertion a welcome release for the pent-up frustration and residual anger. The weights, the treadmill, the sweat, it all helped to quiet the noise in his head. He also started reconnecting with old friends, guys he'd let drift over the years, swallowed up by the domestic routines of marriage. There were awkward first conversations, explaining the situation in clipped, factual sentences. But their quiet support was a solid comfort. A few beers, a round of golf, and a sense of shared history helped to anchor him, reminding him of a self he had almost forgotten. It wasn't easy. Plenty of nights, he'd lie awake in the too-big bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering where it all went wrong. The questions would circle, relentless. Was there something he could have done? Had he missed the signs? The regret, the bitterness, would rise, a familiar ache in his chest. But slowly, painstakingly, day by day, it got easier. Like a wound slowly healing, the raw edges beginning to close, leaving behind a duller, less insistent pain. He started remembering who he was before Paul and Brenda, before the careful compromises and shared routines. He rediscovered old passions, dusting off his acoustic guitar, which had sat neglected in the corner of the spare room for years, practicing old folk songs until his fingers ached. He began cooking for himself, experimenting with new recipes, enjoying the quiet satisfaction of a good meal. The house, once a monument to a broken life, slowly began to feel like a home again. His home. It had been about a year since that Tuesday night when his world came apart over the kitchen table. The seasons had turned, the leaves had fallen and grown back, and the air was getting that familiar crispness again. And Paul, he realized, was doing okay. Better than okay, actually. He'd gotten a promotion at work, the extra hours and focus paying off. The guitar lessons he started had stuck, and he could strum out a passable tune now. He'd even gone on a few dates, nothing serious yet, just casual dinners and movies with women he met through friends or online. It was a start, a tentative step into a new future, one that felt lighter, more open. Brenda, last Paul heard, was working as a waitress in some diner on the outskirts of town. He hadn't seen her, but the news drifted back through mutual acquaintances. Todd, Paul gathered, had apparently disappeared from the corporate scene, moving on from MetroCorp, probably out of state, an unceremonious end to his once promising career. Life, Paul realized, keeps moving. It churns on, relentless and indifferent, even after the ground shakes, even after everything you thought was solid cracks apart. You pick up the pieces, or you don't. But the sun still rises, the seasons still turn, and eventually, the new normal settles in. And sometimes, that new normal isn't so bad after all. The next few weeks passed in a blur of lawyer meetings, legal papers, and strained conversations with friends and family. Brenda had moved out, staying with her sister Kelly, trying to piece her life back together. I heard she lost her job too. Turns out, companies aren't keen on employees who sleep with married bosses, especially when it leads to a public spectacle. I threw myself into work, started hitting the gym more often. I reconnected with old friends I'd let drift over the years. It wasn't easy. Plenty of nights, I'd lie awake, wondering where it all went wrong. If there was something I could have done differently, but slowly, day by day, it got easier, like a wound slowly healing. I started remembering who I was before Paul and Brenda, rediscovering old passions, old dreams I'd put on hold. It's been about a year since that Tuesday night when my world came apart. And I'm doing okay. Better than okay, actually. I got a promotion at work, started guitar lessons again, even went on a few dates. Nothing serious yet, but it's a start. Brenda, last I heard, was working as a waitress in some diner on the outskirts of town. Todd, I gather, had disappeared from the corporate scene. Life, I realize, keeps moving, even after the ground shakes.